Hello and welcome to a very gorgeous, beautiful day here in central London. I didn't prefer to be stuck inside Regent Hall. My office has no windows, it has no natural light, and while this is all happening, I prefer to be out here talking with you. We're going to be talking about the book of Ephesians over this next season. It's a book that reflects something of our own journey as we are at Regent Hall. The whole question of diversity, inclusion and unity is a big question for us as we face the challenges of being right in the centre of one of the most cosmopolitan cities in the world, surrounded by the retail, surrounded by the finance, surrounded by the wealth, also by the poverty. What do we mean when we talk about dealing with diversity and inclusion? What does it mean to be united in those kind of scenarios? Well, the tragedy is that this isn't a new question. It's a question that has permeated and challenged the churches right the way from inception. Look at Acts, and you'll find within weeks of the new church, within weeks of a Pentecostal experience, there's already arguments as to who's first class and who's second class, who's deserving and who should be serving. And it seems as if those kind of questions just continue. The questions of where the position of women, what about gender, what about race, what about slaves and freedom, what about those who are the deserving and those that seemingly undeserving? What about the sinfulness of people and what makes sinfulness too sinful? What is grace? These are all the kinds of questions that are permeated. And Paul was having to deal with those kind of questions in his early ministries. So we're going to be looking at Ephesians. But before I look at Ephesians, I want to share with you a reading from Psalm chapter 8. O Lord, our Lord, how majestic is thy name in all the earth, for thou hast displayed thy splendour above the heavens. From the mouth of infants and nursing babes thou hast established strength, because of thine adversaries, to make the enemy and the revengeful cease. Now when I consider thy heavens, the work of thy fingers, the moon and the stars which thou hast ordained, what is man that thou dost take thought of him, and the son of man that thou dost care for him? Yet thou hast made him a little lower than God himself, and dost crown him with glory and majesty. Thou dost make him to rule over the works of thy hands. Thou hast put all things under his feet, all sheep and oxen and all the beasts of the field, the birds of the heavens and the fish of the sea, whatever passes through the paths of the sea. O Lord, our Lord, how majestic is thy name in all the earth.
We'll
When we come to read Ephesians, we're beginning to grapple with some of the questions of what does it mean to be church in the world today. We're certainly living in a very complex world. It's always been complex. When you read the Acts of the Apostles, within weeks of the Pentecostal experience, they were already having arguments of who deserved what and who should do what and who should receive what. And then we have the arguments about the gender issues. Are women allowed to speak? Are they allowed to preach? What about the issues of slavery and freedom? What about the issues of race and origin and the big issue of Jews and Gentiles? These were already permeating straight away in the new church, and we've continued. I mean, you don't have to read far to find out some of the issues that are going on in the church today. Some are still talking about the gender issues. Some are talking about the sexuality issues. Some are still talking about the race issues. And those things still permeate the church. And one of the reasons we're going to Ephesians is because Paul is grappling with this thought from Psalm chapter 8 that we read earlier, that we made a little lower than the angels. We're giving authority. We made in a very particular way for a relationship with God, and yet somehow we're messing it up with each other, never mind with God. And so he's trying to look at the issues of unity, diversity, and inclusion when he's writing Ephesians. We at Regent Hall are certainly working through some of the issues of what does it mean to be truly inclusive? What does it mean to be diverse? Because in the end, diversity means that we don't agree with each other. So how can we be united? How can we have unity when in our diversity we see things and we have experiences of life that are very different? Where does our unity come from? How do we include each other when sometimes we see things very differently? Paul is trying to grasp that. He grapples with it, with the idea of the Jews and the Gentiles, the Romans and the Greeks, those who believe in many gods and those who believe in one God. A few years ago, we had the privilege of going to Ephesus. It was part of a one-day trip that was part of a holiday in Turkey. And we walked down the main street of Ephesus as it is today. And we saw all the booths along each side and the clinics, and you could still see the signs on the stones that said what were clinics and what were chemists and what different things were. And we saw the toilet places where people would go to do what needed to be done. And we walked down the main street and we came face to face with the fantastic library at Ephesus and the facade that still remains. And we walked around the corner from the library, and there was the great amphitheatre of Artemis. Artemis was part of Greek mythology, a daughter of Zeus. The equivalent in Roman mythology was Diana. We also realised and were told by the guide who took us round that once Ephesus could see the sea, it's far inland now, and there was a road that led round and led into the distance, where once at the end of that road there were the piers and the ships that now can't reach that far. The river has long gone where the ships came in. But you could imagine the sailors and the trade coming to and fro. So I have a picture in my mind of Ephesus. And Paul has a very vivid picture because Acts tells us he'd lived there for 3 years, had worked there for 3 years, had started the church there, had worked there, had got to know the people. So he writes, and there's a lot of conjecture in critical academic thinking that although this is written to the Ephesians, actually early manuscripts don't have that statement that it's written to the Ephesians, but maybe not necessarily to the particular place, but to the area around. You would have thought when you read Ephesians that Paul, having been there for 3 years, would have been a lot more personal, and there's very little statement that shows his personal connection. So there are some critical ideas, and we're not going to go into that. This is not a critical, it's a perspective that comes out of Ephesians, especially relating to inclusion, diversity, and unity. And he comes for underpinning everything that he talks about in Ephesians, is this idea that we have been made uniquely and purposefully by God. Before the very creation of the world, we were in his mind and in his heart. And he has placed in us a stewardship of that world which he has created that belongs to no other aspect of creation. We are unique, and yet in that uniqueness, we are also diverse and difficult and changing. And the difficulty for the church is, how do we cope with that? You don't have to look very far to see the church is still grappling with these issues. Some parts of the church are still grappling over ideas of whether a woman should be a pastor and a preacher within a church. Okay, in the Salvation Army, that's not something that is part of our argument. We have aspects about the sacraments. Different churches see sacraments having different places within their thinking. Race continues. Sexuality is a big aspect. Yet we are all made in the image of God. We're all made unique to be of God. He has given us a unique stewardship of his created world. And as part of that, it's our responsibility to work out what it means to grapple and learn from the issues. The very fact of diversity means that not everybody agrees. Some will not agree with me on aspects of what I present to you about Ephesians. Does that mean we can't be united? That we can't be inclusive in our diversity? That we can't learn to love, overcoming our opinion? After all, we're trying to capture an enormous God within a simple framework of what we can hold and what we can understand. There's no way we can do that justice in a lifetime. We can grapple with it, we can seek it, we can try to understand it, but in the end I come to God and I say, Father, you're bigger than me. I can't understand it all. So I hope on this journey of these next few weeks, when we're grappling with this idea, what does it mean to be made in the image of God? What does it mean to be made a little lower than the angels? What does it mean when the majesty of God holds us together despite so many of the differences and diversities and the uniquenesses of our life and our living? The tragedy of the church is when we can't love sufficiently to understand that some are not the same as me. The tragedy of the church is when hate and anger fill us rather than hope and love. I hope as we go through these next chapters of Ephesians that you, like me, will also seek to gain a perspective of understanding what it means to be made in the image of God. For you and me, as different as we may be, to be made uniquely, purposefully, meaningfully in the very image of an almighty, loving God. O Lord, my Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. May God bless you.
God God of creation, there at the start, before the beginning of time. With no point of reference, you spoke to the dark and fleshed out the wonder of light.
And as you speak, 100 billion galaxies are born. In the vapor of your breath, the planets form. If the stars were made to worship, so will I. I can see your heart in everything you've made. Every burning star, a signal fire of grace. If creation sings your praises, so will I.
The stars were made to worship, so will I. If the mountains bow in reverence, so will I. If the oceans roar your greatness, so will I. For if everything exists to lift you high, so will I. The wind goes where you send it, so will I. If the rocks cry out in silence, so will I. If the sum of all our praises still falls shine, then we'll sing again 100 billion times. God of salvation, you chased down my heart through all my failures and pride. On a hill you created the light of the world, abandoned in darkness to die. And as you speak, 100 billion failures disappear. Where you lost your life so I could find it here. If you left the grave behind you, so will I. I can see your heart in everything you've done. Every part designed in the work of art for love. If you gladly choose surrender, so will I can see your heart in a billion different ways. Every precious one, a child you died to save. If you gave your life to love them, so will I. Like you would again 100 billion times. No measure could amount to your
Desire.
You're the one